Welcome back, everyone, to the Deep Dive. Today we are diving straight into a really concerning situation that emerged this week. It's the killing of two Palestinian journalists, Hossam Shabat and Mohammed Mansour, in Gaza.
Yeah.
And this all took place on Monday, March 24th, 2025, when both men died in separate Israeli airstrikes. And so our goal in this deep dive today, based on all the information we have so far, is to really help you understand all the circumstances surrounding these deaths. What exactly happened? What were the reactions to the killings? And what did these events tell us about the larger issue of press freedom, especially in conflict zones? We are going to be taking a close look at all the different accounts and try to unpack for you what is really important here.
Yeah, I think this is a really, really important one because it's a very stark and I would say tragic reminder of the dangers journalists face when reporting from active conflict zones.
Well,
so I think to really get a grasp of the situation, we need to break down the details of what happened and understand how people have responded.
Absolutely. So let's start by introducing you to these two journalists. Hossam Shabat was a young man, only 23 years old, and he was a correspondent for Al Jazeera Mubasher.
Mm-hmm.
And he was known for his reporting from northern Gaza, providing, I think, a really crucial window into events unfolding there.
Yeah, and Mohammed Mansour, he was a correspondent for Palestine Today TV, which is actually a Beirut-based outlet.
Okay.
And he was killed in a separate airstrike, this one in southern Gaza, in Khan Yunis. And tragically, reports indicate that his wife and son also died in that same strike.
Oh, wow.
So it's a truly devastating loss for their families and, of course, for the whole journalistic community.
Yeah, absolutely. Just a horrible situation all around. And, of course, after these events, there was a very quick and strong reaction from all these organizations dedicated to protecting press freedom around the world.
Right. Yeah.
So can you kind of take us through what that immediate response looked like?
Well, the condemnations came out very quickly, and I think it's important for listeners to understand that these organizations carry a lot of weight in the international community.
Yeah.
So, for example, the Committee to Protect Journalists, also known as the CPJ, they were one of the first to issue a statement, and it was a very strong statement.
Right.
Their program director, Carlos Martinez de la Serna, he said that he was, and I'm quoting here, appalled by these deaths. And he made a point to emphasize that under international law, journalists are considered civilians.
Right.
So attacking them in a war zone is illegal, plain and simple.
Right.
And they have called for an independent international investigation to determine if these journalists were deliberately targeted.
Right.
And they've also stressed that Israel needs to be held accountable for these deaths.
Yeah, and that call for accountability has definitely been a recurring theme in these situations historically.
Mm.
So, of course, for you to get the full picture here, we also need to understand the response that have been coming from the Israeli military, the IDF. Mm-hmm. So what has their response been so far to these killings?
Well, the IDF has confirmed that they did carry out the strikes that killed both journalists, but they're presenting a very different narrative.
Right.
They're actually labeling both Hossam Shabat and Mohammed Mansour as terrorists.
Wow.
And specifically, in the case of Hossam Shabat, they accused him of being a sniper terrorist.
Okay.
Affiliated with the Beit Lahia battalion of Hamas.
Okay.
And they even say that they have documentation that proves his direct affiliation with the military wing of the Hamas terrorist organization. Mm-hmm. Now, regarding Mohammed Mansour, the IDF said that the airstrike that killed him was actually targeting Hamas and Islamic Jihad operatives who were in the area of Khan Yunis.
So, it's really important for you, the listener, to recognize that we have two totally opposite accounts here. And the IDF is saying that these men were essentially legitimate military targets because they were involved in terrorist activities. Yeah. Now, this isn't the first time that we have seen these kinds of accusations made against journalists in this region.
Right. No, it's not.
It's a sadly recurring issue.
Exactly. And in fact, in October 2024, the IDF made similar accusations against Hossam Shabat and 5 other Palestinian journalists, all of whom worked for Al Jazeera in Gaza. They claimed these individuals were members of Hamas and Islamic Jihad.
Wow.
But both Al Jazeera and Hossam Shabat himself very strongly denied those allegations at the time.
Yeah, I think it's also important to point out that Shabat, even back then, understanding how dangerous the situation was, he directly addressed these accusations, which really put his life at risk.
Yeah, that's right. He spoke to the CPJ back then in October after those accusations were first made, and his statement is quite powerful. He said, and I quote, "We convey the truth on Al Jazeera Mubasher. Our only crime is that we convey the image and the truth. And I think this really highlights just how precarious their situation is. I mean, they're facing these accusations that not only try to discredit them as reporters, but also put their lives in real danger.
Yeah. It paints a picture of a journalist who is so dedicated to his work that he's willing to risk his own life for it. And we've heard similar accounts from his family and colleagues.
Yeah, there have been some really, really powerful descriptions of his character.
Yeah.
His family has said that he was completely devoted to reporting from Gaza.
Yeah.
And that he knew the dangers.
Right.
He believed that ultimately his commitment to the truth would lead to his death.
Wow.
His brother Mahmoud actually said, and this is a quote, he knew that to be a journalist in Gaza to tell the truth meant that he would be killed.
It's just so chilling.
Yeah.
And sadly, it seemed like he had even contemplated this possibility and prepared for it.
Yes.
He had a message prepared that he wanted to publish after his death.
Yeah.
Which I think speaks volumes about his dedication to his work.
It's incredibly moving and offers a really valuable insight into his motivations. In this message, he talks about how, for the past 18 months, he dedicated himself entirely to the people of Gaza. He meticulously documented what he called the horrors in the north, minute by minute, wanting to reveal a truth that he felt others were trying to conceal. And he urged people to continue speaking about Gaza and what's happening there and not to let the world turn a blind eye.
Yeah.
And he also expressed a sense of, I would say, finding rest after what he called an extended period of hardship.
I mean, this just underscores the absolutely vital and dangerous role that journalists play, especially in conflict zones, bringing us these stories at great personal risk. This brings us to the broader impact of these killings on press freedom and journalist safety as a whole.
I think it's crucial to understand that these killings are not isolated incidents. Journalists covering the Israel-Gaza conflict already face extreme danger. The CPJ estimates that over 170 journalists and media workers have been killed since October 2023. That's a staggering number, and it's actually the deadliest period for journalists globally since 1992 when they started tracking these figures. And the Palestinian Journalists Syndicate reports an even higher number, over 200.
That's unbelievable. Those numbers are just so high.
Yeah.
And as we touched upon earlier, international law does provide some protection for journalists working in conflict zones.
Right. Under international humanitarian law, journalists are recognized as civilians, which means they have the same protections as any other civilian in a war zone. So targeting them is a direct violation of international law.
Right.
Press freedom organizations are really concerned about what they see as a disturbing trend: the labeling of killed Palestinian journalists as terrorists, often without any real evidence.
Right.
This not only tries to justify the killings after the fact, but also creates a climate of fear and impunity.
Yeah, it almost feels like it undermines the very protections that are designed to keep journalists safe.
Exactly.
And, these killings didn't happen in a vacuum. There's a larger context of this ongoing conflict that we need to consider here.
Absolutely. And it's important to note that the killings of Hossam Shabat and Mohammed Mansour occurred shortly after Israel resumed airstrikes on Gaza on March 18th. Which came after a ceasefire that had been in place since January 19th. So there was an escalation of violence leading up to their deaths.
And these, sadly, aren't the only recent examples of the dangers faced by Palestinians who are just trying to tell their stories.
No, unfortunately, that's true. Around the same time, in the West Bank, there was this brutal attack on the Oscar-winning Palestinian filmmaker Hamdan Bilal. He was attacked by Israeli settlers. And this really just underscores the very real threats facing Palestinians who are documenting their lives and experiences.
Yeah.
It's also worth noting that in the U.S., the Supreme Court just recently declined to hear a case that was challenging New York Times v. Sullivan. Now, this is a landmark ruling that's really the foundation of press freedom in the U.S.
Right.
It protects journalists from libel lawsuits. So, it's quite a stark contrast to the situation we're seeing in Gaza.
It is. It is. And going back to the case of Hossam Shabat specifically, there was actually a disturbing report that surfaced recently that we should probably address.
Right. Democracy Now! Reported that he was on a hit list.
Wow.
And this raises serious questions about whether he was deliberately targeted.
Yeah.
And I think if that's true, it adds another layer of complexity to an already very complicated situation.
Yeah, absolutely. So, this has been a really sobering but extremely important discussion, I think. And to sum it all up, we've looked at the tragic deaths of these two journalists, Hossam Shabat and Mohammed Mansour. the very different stories being told about how they died, and the serious concerns that this raises about the safety and freedom of journalists who are reporting from conflict zones around the world.
It's crucial for listeners to understand the gravity of this situation and the profound risks that journalists face in these environments. We have these starkly contrasting accounts of the killings and so many unanswered questions about who is responsible and how to ensure accountability. And the sheer number of journalists who've lost their lives in this conflict alone, it should be a wake-up call for all of us.
So, to kind of leave you with a final thought, these journalists play such an essential role in giving us firsthand information from places where most of us will never go. And they do this at great personal risk. So what responsibilities do we have? What responsibility do international organizations have to protect them and demand justice when they are harmed?
Yeah.
And even more broadly, what happens when these journalists are silenced? What are the consequences for us, for the world, when the truths they risk everything to uncover are suppressed or denied? It's a question we all need to grapple with.
I agree completely. It's an issue that deserves far more attention and action.
Absolutely. All right, everyone, thank you for joining us for another deep dive.
Thanks for listening.